You're listening to the Sass podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Annia Palacios, a licensed professional counselor and owner of Tightrope Therapy, an online therapy and coaching practice dedicated to helping moms find balance in life and motherhood. Annia combines her professional experience as a therapist and coaching, along with her life experience as a mom and stepmom, to help support women in all stages of motherhood and life. Her expertise in perinatal mental health supports families as they navigate infertility, miscarriage, grief, anxiety, depression, birth trauma, and the relationship challenges that can come with parenthood. All right, so today Annia shares the story of how and why, even as a therapist herself, she did not seek out professional help while experiencing postpartum depression. We talk about the adjustments that she and her husband made to their home life to bring peace and joy to their parenthood experience. We talk about the difference between postpartum depression and clinical depression. We talk about mom rage, overstimulation, shame, guilt, and anxiety. And before we get into this conversation, I want to remind you of the amazingness that is Modern Mom Style Box. Modern Mom Style Box is a rental service that makes it easy to wear new clothes all month long without any stress or commitment. From seasonal staples to statement pieces, rent unlimited looks for just one flat fee of $60 a month. Yeah, it's an amazing deal. You can effortlessly switch up your look all month long with an unlimited rotation of styles delivered right to your door. And you can trust me on this one. I'm a Modern Mom Style Box client, and it is as easy and wonderful as it sounds. And as you know, for me, the absolute no-brainer cherry on top is that Modern Mom Style Box was created by Tara Clark, creator of Modern Mom Probs and guest on episode 3 of this show. She knows what we want, she knows what we need, and I just pretty much have 100% confidence in anything Tara does. So check it out today. The link will be in the show notes. Here's Annia. Hey, Annia. Thank you so much for being here. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Christy. Thanks for having me.
You pitched me and it was very interesting. The first line you said was why a therapist didn't go to therapy. What does that mean?
That is me.
Why?
So the big question everyone wants to know. I have been a therapist for now, about 11 years. And when I had my oldest child, my firstborn, I struggled with postpartum depression, but I didn't go to therapy. And at the time, it was both because we definitely, don't talk about it enough in the experiences of postpartum and our mental health in general as moms, but even within our therapist circles, we don't talk about perinatal mental health. We don't talk about postpartum. We talk about general depression, general anxiety. So even as a therapist, I knew something was off, but I didn't have a full grasp on exactly what it was. And then there was so much shame too, because we had this expectation of like, therapists know what to do. You help all of these other people and you can't help yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what did postpartum depression look like for you? How did it manifest?
For me, initially, I remember vividly just the chaos of events that transpired with the ideal birth and the birth plan that I had in place for my son, and nothing seemed to go as planned. We were supposed to have this natural birth at a birth center. That's what I had wanted after 36 hours of grueling
Oh my
labor.
goodness. Yeah.
Had to be um, taken very quickly to a hospital where I had not planned to be, with now a doctor because my midwife couldn't deliver, that I hadn't anticipated. Had to have an epidural, which absolutely nothing wrong with that, but was not part of my plan. Had to have an episiotomy. So there were so many
Mm,
complications, and I didn't have the birth that I wanted and had envisioned for all 9 months of this pregnancy and even beforehand. And in that moment, I felt like I failed. I
mm,
felt like my body had failed me. And I remember the moment where they placed my son on my chest, and he felt like a stranger to me.
mm,
And it took me years to admit that out loud, because we have this expectation of motherhood and that love at first sight and the overwhelming love. And he was a stranger to me. And
mhm,
there was this part of me that like knew that this was my baby, right? And wanted to connect, but it was not love at first sight. It was something else. And looking back on that, that was really the start of the journey of postpartum depression that I'd have.
mhm. And thank you for sharing. I think that it's so important to hear women say that, because I think even now, still, as much as you, me, so many others are out here talking about this, you know, motherhood content, you don't, at least for me, and I don't think many others, you don't really start to consume it until you're in the experience. So it's not typically something you're going to hear ahead of time that, hey, when this baby gets placed on your chest, you may not feel what exactly, like you said, what it looks like in the movies. I remember my first, um, when they handed her to me, I didn't cry, and I was, I had feelings for her, similar to what you're saying, but I expected to be so overwhelmed with emotion, right? And I looked at my husband and I said, "Why aren't I crying? What's wrong?" And he's like, "Babe, you're drugged up right now." Like, this is a whole thing, a lot going on, a lot of people poking and prodding. Like, there's plenty of time to cry over and with your baby. Like, it's okay. And I just am so appreciative that he had that enough wherewithal in a moment after watching me give birth to say that, because I expected to just melt. Like,
Oh,
everything
yeah.
was beautiful and it was so not.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's that one question that seems so small in that moment that you said, "What is wrong with me?"
Yeah.
Right. And that
That's the shame.
question
Yeah.
then is the shame. And we continue to carry that message forward and internalize that.
Yeah. So going through that and not going to therapy, how did you cope?
So I have always been that person who, on the surface, my default is showing strength. Everyone thinks that I'm fine. Nobody would know. And most people, even today, have no idea what that journey was actually like for me. My husband was really my saving grace, and we had to make so many adjustments. And I feel like what I did was compartmentalize little things to make it work and to kind of like fake it till I make it, to make small adjustments that felt more manageable. They were probably not the ideal thing to do now looking back, and with all the moms I work with now as a therapist, I'd recommend a completely different path, but it's the only thing I felt like I could make it work in that moment. So for me, um, I begged my husband to stay home.
Mhm.
I could not handle, and I was, the plan for me was never to be a stay-at-home mom. I'd already been working as a therapist for a big company, and the plan was, 6 weeks of maternity leave, and I was going to go back. But
Oh my
I
goodness.
begged him to stay home. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. He had to stay home. And there I am, like 2 weeks postpartum, looking up my company policies of could I go back to work sooner. So
Wow.
my default became avoidance of I just got to remove myself from the situation because I was so overwhelmed with motherhood, with just all the shame that I had internalized through that. So even today, my husband is still a stay-at-home dad, and it works fantastic for us. It works really well. and we've gotten to a place where it's a really good thing for us, but I own that it didn't start out that way. It came from a place of desperation on my end that I couldn't do it. All of these things that I feel like I failed from the birth that I had to even nursing. I had all of these dreams and visions of breastfeeding my baby. We go to that first pediatrician visit. I had been struggling nursing. He tells me that the baby has jaundice.
Mhm.
So he's not getting enough food and not getting enough nutrition because my milk hadn't fully come in. And again, it was another moment where I felt like I failed. My
Yeah.
body was continuing to fail, and I wasn't this mom that I thought that I would be. So I remember I had to go in the other room as my husband is giving him the formula bottle, and just tears, because absolutely nothing wrong with formula feeding, right? Formula fed my second. But it was that internalized message of I felt like I failed. So we had to do all of these little things and adjustments to be able to survive, because it
Mhm.
was all about what adjustments do I need in order to survive motherhood, because it was just such a struggle for me in ways that I didn't expect, and so much questioning of, am I cut out for this?
Mhm.
I had so many moments where I wondered, did I make a mistake in becoming a mom? Like,
Mhm.
did I make a mistake? This thing that I had always envisioned would be a part of my life in in this journey of motherhood, and I wasn't sure in those moments if I was cut out for it.
Mhm. So, so I want to go back for a second. When you said you begged your husband to stay home, you actually meant leave his job and stay home.
Yes, to
And
leave his job, and my
wow,
husband left his job and
at
stayed
2
home. I think,
weeks postpartum, or how long after was that?
oh my gosh, probably, yeah, probably within that first week,
Like
if
within
I'm
wow,
honest. It was happening real quick where I just instantly was like,
you just knew. Yeah.
I just
Okay.
knew I can't do this. Yeah. I
And
think initially he went to like part-time. We readjusted the schedule, and within a few months, probably within like 2 to 3 months, he had quit his job.
mhm. And how long after that did you actually go back to work?
I actually went back to work within my 6 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, and even that was, I was both so relieved to go back to work and such deep shame that
Yeah.
I was relieved to go back to work.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with your second, did you go back just as quickly or did you take more time?
I took more time with my second,
Yeah.
and the process, it was still like, still to this day, being a stay-at-home mom, all the respect in the world, I still, because I love what I do and helping people, I still want to incorporate this as part of my life. But now I look backwards, right? Of how can I do what I do and prioritize my time with my kids and spend more time with them? I'm looking for that versus at that point, especially with my first, I was trying to run away from that,
Yeah.
so to speak. I loved my kids, I loved my baby, but I didn't love motherhood.
Yeah. Okay. And wow. So in those moments of, you know, questioning, did I make a mistake in becoming a mother? You said your default became avoidance. You still then went on to get pregnant again. So what happened in between that said, okay, let's do this again?
Yeah. It took me almost 2 years to find myself in motherhood. And I think that's important to say, because we think about like postpartum depression like as this like acute piece or chapter that happened, and then we figure it out, or we normalize that all moms struggle for a little bit and then we figure it out. Looking back, it took me almost 2 years to find myself in motherhood. So, and I remember, because as soon as you have a baby, people start to ask, when are you going to try again for a second? And
Mhm.
for so long, it was absolutely not, did not think that we were going to have a second child. And actually, my son was probably 10 months when we unintentionally got pregnant. I
Mm.
ended up having a miscarriage.
Oh,
But in that moment, it was such relief,
yeah. Yeah.
complicated grief,
Yes.
but relief, because I was not ready. I was
Mhm.
not ready. Then we ended up, and then I had a second miscarriage. Then at the point, he was probably about 2 when we were ready. to have another child. And then it was devastation because, or the more typical um, experience that we'd expect after a miscarriage, because then I felt like I was at a point that I was ready. But those two very different experiences, I think, speak to where my mental health was at that point. So, to answer your question, what happened within those 2 years is a lot of work on myself, a lot of conversation with my husband about being able to acknowledge what it was that I needed, to acknowledge that I get overstimulated easily. I couldn't be around the baby all the time. That being to be okay with myself, that I needed time away, that being able to implement boundaries for certain things, that to have my life serve me in the way that I needed it to. So a lot of work and a lot of healing at that point. Then later on came my own therapy and just really working on myself to be okay with the type of mom that I was, and be okay that that mom wasn't maybe the type of mom that I once thought I would be.
Hmm. And if you don't mind me asking, where, like, how did all of this, if so, impact your relationship? I mean, your husband, that's a huge thing, like a huge shift. Like you're thinking motherhood's going to be one way for you. And next thing you know, you're asking him to leave his job, stay home. How did you guys work through that?
Yeah. He is just my rock. There's no way I would have been able to do any of this without him. And it came a lot of sacrifice for him, right? Because we think about, there's a piece of, what does it mean for his identity as a man
Right.
to stay home? His lack of support system, because you have mommy and me classes, there's not a lot of daddy and me happening. There's not a lot of play dates, or there's a lot of play dates where he shows up and is the only male there.
Right.
So there was a lot of that, of giving him the space to work through that and just honoring our own experiences. I think we've always, because of my practice as a therapist, strive to work on communication. There's a lot of things that I've learned, and sprinkle it into our relationship a little bit about how we communicate, about being able to communicate our needs and our emotions in healthy, productive ways, being able to hear each other and adjust and adapt to one another and what we needed.
Hmm.
We also knew that we were all we had. We live far away from our families who live, it's not accessible for them to be an active part of our everyday support system. So we knew that this was it and we had to make it work. He also has, I have a stepdaughter who's 14. And so I've been a very active part of her life since she was about 2. But that experience in, an early relationship that he had that didn't work out in the way that maybe they would have at one point envisioned that it would, gave us an opportunity to learn a lot about what it was to raise children, about communication, about how much we wanted to use that experience to really value and appreciate each other.
Hmm.
And it got us to where we are today.
Hmm. How did becoming a mother impact your life as a stepmother, or your mindset as a stepmother, or just, I don't know, imagine that coming into her life as her, to
Yeah.
her? Yeah, her life at such a young age is great and tricky. And then having your own biological children is a whole nother element. Like what was that intersection like for you, and the impact that it had on you?
Yeah. It's something that to this day, we still constantly juggle, because it's like schedules and itineraries and figuring out how do we prioritize everybody's needs, knowing that at the same time, not everybody's needs can always be that top priority. So
Yeah.
always wanting to integrate her as part of our family, because she is, having her feel included and important has always been something that's super important, of course, to him, but also to me. And so having to figure out those ways to have her feel included while also having her autonomy, her own relationships with each of us. And it really gave me an appreciation for what it means to be a mom,
Mhm.
because she has taught me so much. I think she also showed me what kind of a parent my husband was going to be. I had a unique experience of having a pre glimpse into that so many couples don't have. So
Mhm.
I think that helped us already have a lot of the conversations and see how parenting changes relationships, because of that experience of being a step parent before I was a biological one.
Mhm. All right. Now I want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Why did you initially become a therapist?
Oh, well,
Why? Yeah.
child, my own childhood, my
Yeah.
own experiences of childhood. I am a first generation Mexican American. And my parents, there are just different ways that we raise our children, different ways to parent, different ways to discipline. And a lot of those experiences of me then being very hyper attuned to other people's emotional needs, being always hyper independent, some parentification, being responsible, and always like this high achiever, all of these things that I thought or were presented to me as measures of success were actually my reactions. And this goes to my avoidance, my reactions to trauma that I experienced. And so this led me into just hyper empathy for other people, being a highly sensitive person, being very attuned to caring for other people's emotional needs. And I use that now through my own healing and have done all that work, but use that as a strength to be able to care for other people.
Hmm. And with your experience now, you mentioned it earlier. Why do you think it is that within your field, you know, postpartum, perinatal mood disorders really aren't discussed as much as they should be? Let's say that.
Yeah. I just
Like
think it's
societally, I can think of reasons, but within a field that you would think will kind of be more in tune, why do you think not?
I think it goes to the same thing. It's because
Same.
just from a societal level, we don't prioritize moms and their needs. Same thing in the mental health space is we don't prioritize that postpartum depression is not just depression that happens in postpartum. It's
Mm,
different. It shows up differently, but we just kind of categorize it as, oh, you just happen to have a baby and you have regular depression when in fact it's a completely separate subset.
mm. Okay, so talk about that a little bit. What could be some of the differences between straight up clinical depression and postpartum?
Yeah. So I think postpartum depression is really sneaky. We
Mm,
don't think that it's something when we are experiencing postpartum depression, we don't think that we are struggling with something externally like anxiety. I'll talk about that too, or depression. We internalize it in postpartum and think that it's me and there's something wrong with me. When I see therapy clients who come who are not moms, we'll just talk general population. It is not uncommon that they will come and say, I'm coming to therapy because I think I'm depressed. Moms will rarely use the term, I think I have postpartum depression. We don't identify it as there's something that externally is existing that is wrong with me or impacting my ability to be a mom. We think that it's internal and it's a shame piece. Moms will say, I don't feel like myself. We talk about that isolation, the loneliness, the loss of identity. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize who I am anymore. I'm not a good mom. I'm not cut out for this. But we don't think about it as like an external factor in the
mm,
same way.
mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of that is, you know, because if I mean, I don't know, I'm gonna say this and you're gonna know what I mean, but I might have to clarify it afterwards. But it's almost like the external factor is this little baby that, that you're supposed to just love and you do, but it's hard to imagine that bringing your child into the world would make you feel depressed. It's
Yeah,
like that A plus B does not equal C. It's like that cannot be. That so it has to be something else. It has to be me. It feels almost like how could I place blame is not the right word, but until you go through the process of healing, that is often what it feels like. It's like, how could I blame this child for me feeling this way? I don't know.
absolutely.
It's
And we
tough.
are like spoon fed these messages of motherhood is the happiest time of your life,
Right.
that it's that love at first sight, that isn't this just so great,
Yeah.
both before we have a baby and when the baby's here. So there is no space for me to say, actually, this is not great.
Yeah.
People, I mean, we don't even check in on moms, right? It's like, how's the baby? How's the baby
I
sleeping?
know.
Yeah.
I know it makes me crazy. I've said this before. I'm sure you say it. I know so many of us say it. It's like, you know, why isn't a follow-up appointment with a mental health professional part of the every everyday process of delivering a baby, like in any way, shape, or form, becoming a parent. You have a 6-week follow-up with your OB. Let's have a 6-week follow-up at the same time with a therapist. Or I think it was Lina Forrestal. I interviewed her. She was like, honestly, I think that if you just even incorporate a 30-minute session with a therapist halfway through the pregnancy to just check in, you'd probably alleviate so many of the issues postpartum that we see now. The system is not
100%.
set up properly for us to succeed.
100% agree. And that's where a lot of the work that I try to do is to be able to work with moms during pregnancy, because I think we prepare the nursery, right? How much time and how many Pinterest boards do we dedicate to the nursery? And then we prepare the baby registry, right? So that we have all the perfect little items and the wipes warmer, which we'll never use, and all the things to prepare for baby. But we don't prepare for the mental load of motherhood and how motherhood will not only change us, but also change our relationship. I
Yes.
think it's something like 66 to 65 to 70% of relationships and new parents struggle with feeling connected to their partner in that first year postpartum.
Mhm.
And we don't talk about it, we don't prepare for it enough. So if we just have those moments, this is where I like to loop in the midwives and the OBs to refer women to therapy during pregnancy or to coaching, to just have that moment to just check in, and let's help set you up for success and prepare you so that even if this happens and you experience postpartum depression, anxiety, the baby blues, intrusive thoughts, that you know that while this is common, it's not normal, and support is available, and we can reduce the shame and reduce how long you wait to seek help.
Mhm. So give someone listening who is not, had experience with therapy or coaching, what are some of the ways that you work with moms to help them start to cope and deal and heal and kind of work through all of this? What are some really tangible ways that it looks like to work with you?
Yeah, so we'll break it up because therapy and coaching is kind of two different spaces in my practice and two very different services. So let's talk about therapy first. Therapy is often doing a deep dive into understanding how the experiences that I'm having today are shaped by all of the other things going on in my life, both present as well as past. How those messages and core beliefs that I have about myself that I may not even recognize that I have, how are those showing up in who I am today and contributing to the challenges that I'm having? That can be with anxiety, with postpartum depression, with OCD, and just tackling all these different spaces. And so what that work looks like is being able to meet on a regular basis, and a lot of vulnerability in getting to know ourselves in a different way that we never have before, and having a safe place to be able to do that and work towards. I think it's like we're this puzzle piece, right? We have to first figure out how all of the pieces have come together, and then be able to transition that into something new and feel okay about who we are and heal those pieces that are maybe broken or damaged along the way. Coaching is very present and future focused. So I do a lot of coaching for mom rage and for
Mm.
preparing pregnant women for parenthood, and they're preparing them for their relationship and all of those. So we take, okay, what is happening in this moment? Overstimulation and anxiety are big pieces of that. And so we look at what are the triggers, how to understand those, and then working on coping tools, actionable items, and then kind of like fine tuning to be able to find success with that and be able to reduce how often that's happening, reduce some of that guilt and shame that I feel about it. So,
Mhm.
very more action oriented versus therapy, which is a lot more kind of process oriented.
Okay. And how do you define mom rage?
Yeah, I think mom rage is this like wave of emotion that suddenly hits us, often unexpected, and we feel out of control of ourselves. I hear, often I think mom rage stems from when we feel like we're not heard, we're not seen, and we're not important. And it comes often as a shock and a surprise, because the message is, I've never been an angry person before. And
Mhm.
here I am yelling at my kids again, and I can't stop it. it's often not an anger problem, it's actually an overstimulation and an anxiety issue.
So what are some okay. All right. So I can hear that and I can think of the ways that I get overstimulated, and I wouldn't have initially connected that to anxiety. Now I'm at a point that I can,
Mhm.
but help someone understand what overstimulation does to us and how that is connected to anxiety if they're trying to figure out if this is them.
Yeah. Okay. So let's give two separate examples of mom rage that can be triggered by overstimulation or triggered by anxiety because they can coexist, but they can also be different.
Okay.
So let's think about the situation where your toddler is running into a busy parking lot at Target. In that moment, we respond with what looks like anger and rage, but that's actually underneath the surface, that's fear and anxiety.
Yes. Okay.
Overstimulation and rage comes from me snapping at my kids because they're constantly touching me and that's overstimulating. They're grabbing my hair and they're climbing on me. They want to be held. There's constant noise. They're arguing with each other. The baby's crying. The TV's on. That overstimulation and that sensory overload is then we can rage and respond in again what looks like anger on the surface. But this is the buildup of overstimulation.
Hmm. And how do we start to how do we start to reel that in?
Yeah, first we have to understand what is the trigger? What are those situations, the sensations, is it noise? Is it touch? Is it um, anxiety? What is triggering me to rage? And then once I can understand that, then we can kind of tease it apart of what's under the surface and then working on, I think before we can fix something, quote, like fix it and prevent it, we have to recognize it after the fact of like, okay, there it is. I raged. I'm going to own it. Kind of do a mental evaluation of what happened in that moment, assess afterwards, so that then the goal is that we work towards in the moment being able to regulate, to slow it down, and eventually then we move towards prevention. But we can't prevent it if we don't understand it and know
Mhm,
what's happening both in the moment and afterwards.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Okay. And I have a note here. I could like deep dive that all day, but I have other things I want to ask you about. So,
Go for it.
um, one thing that I think particularly is not spoken about is also having, symptoms or signs or feelings of anxiety and depression during pregnancy. Talk to me a little bit about that. I feel like that is it less common than is it truly uncommon or is it just not recognized?
It's often not recognized. We don't talk about it. There's very little awareness and there's very little research on it. Actually, we're growing in that space, but there's very little research to understand the pregnancy related depression and anxiety that we experience, but it's there. It's
Yeah.
there. And so what this often looks like during pregnancy is maybe if we think about depression is that I am not looking forward to the baby shower. I am
Mhm.
not excited about some of these things that I like quote feel I should be excited about or was excited about at one point. I'm not. I'm going through the motion. I feel disconnected to myself or feel disconnected to this pregnancy and the baby. We're just not connecting and some of that if you think about then my experience of delivering a baby and not feeling connected that some of those experiences can happen during pregnancy and we think like well it's coming right or like maybe when the baby gets here or at some point that I'll feel this and we don't those can be signs of pregnancy related depression.
Mm,
Anxiety can look like I'm anxious about I'm anxious about falling and hurting myself. I'm anxious about um, just constantly checking the kicks. Maybe I buy a fetal heart rate monitor because I just need to be able to check the heart rate. Like those kind of checking practices can be some anxiety, some OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm just anxious about what's happening, anxious about my appointments, all of these things. I have ruminating thoughts, intrusive thoughts, meaning that either I'm thinking about things over and over again in a way that feels a little bit excessive, maybe, or intrusive thoughts, which means out of nowhere, here come these unwanted unwelcome thoughts about like what would happen if I just fell down these stairs right now. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared I could hurt myself or the baby. And these things can happen during pregnancy, worried about birth complications, which is natural and normal
Right.
and common, but it goes to a point where it is happening. Well, it's hard to conceptualize, right? How much is
It's like
too often, but in
disrupting your life.
exactly in a point where it's disrupting our life and our
Yeah.
ability to function as we want to.
Yeah. I was just going, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you, that was going to be my follow up because, you know, I can see now the difference in my pregnant mindset with my firstborn versus my second. You know, you just, the first time you're going through it is wild and you want to do everything right and you want to be as healthy as possible. And there is, I think, a normal, healthy level of anxiety that comes with creating a life for the first time, right? Like your body
Yeah.
is transforming and creating life. Like that is anxiety provoking to some extent. And in a situation that's coming to mind is I went to a concert. I think I was my second trimester, and it was an outdoor concert, and people were starting to smoke.
Mm.
And you know, we were very far away from them, but I was like, nope, we're done. We got to go. You know, and but it was this was my favorite band. We kept moving further and further away, and at some point I just looked at my husband and I was like, I'm not actually even enjoying myself because I'm so worried about this. I'm giving myself cramps stressing over this. Like it's not even worth staying anymore. So we need to go. And like maybe that was the right decision anyway because of smoke and this and that, but it was all consuming versus how do I feel about this? I'm anxious about, you know, it just there wasn't a lot of mindfulness practice in my life then. So it was just it was just panic. Some of that
Yeah.
is normal, right? Like some of that, especially going through it the first time, is going to be expected to some extent.
Yes. Yes. Especially for first time moms. There's so much uncertainty in pregnancy because we've never done this before. There's so
Right.
much pressure. So there's a normal element to having fear, worry, all of that is normal. And then, but it can cross that point to where it creates disruption. If we use this as an example, this might have been something had it continued into for weeks and months, worrying and looking up symptoms, constantly calling the doctor, let me go in and check that something is wrong with the baby, where it goes to another point where now it's creating disruption in your life
Mhm.
outside of just this one moment. I think also our Google histories can probably is not a scientific way, but it can reveal a lot
Totally.
about our mental health and where we at by what are the things that I'm frequently Googling, especially during pregnancy. If this is something that is so common that I'm anxious, nervous, worried, then that might be kind of telling about where our mental health and our headspace is at.
Yeah, totally. And I think you would agree with what I'm about to say. Um, I think it's important to clarify that disruption of your life is also going to look different for everyone. So if you're a person that has rarely experiences any anxiety and you're at a concert and you're having this feeling, it's okay if that is enough for you to feel uncomfortable enough to get help for it. Like it's not up for anyone else to decide, but the person experiencing it, what is disruptive?
Absolutely. It is so
Right? Like there's
subjective
no
based.
barometer. Like I feel like we're always like trying to figure out like, well, it's not disruptive enough. According to this scale, according to this person, it's not disruptive enough. So I don't need to get help. And it's almost like this excuse to be like, okay, good, I'm normal. It's like it doesn't it's okay. Like just if it's bothering you, that's enough, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. If it's bothering you, that's enough. If it's going to be so subjective based on our own experiences, and it's okay to seek help. We often engage in this comparative suffering where
Yeah.
it's, well, somebody has it worse, right? Somebody has been through harder things. This is not serious enough. So we minimize and invalidate our own experiences and continue to struggle in silence because we don't give ourselves that space to know that it doesn't have to be the worst thing in order for me to be able to seek some help.
Mhm. All right. So at what point did you like how long have you been focusing solely on moms?
This has been for the last few years. I think really after having my second,
Okay.
Then because many therapists start out as kind of generalists and we see everybody, but after having my second, that really transitioned my work into seeing once I had a completely different experience and have now really come into my own space and comfort and joy in motherhood. And not every moment is joy, not every day is joy, but overall, the overarching feeling is I really enjoy being a mom. That led me to want to be able to create a space to give moms the same.
Okay. And I ask because I'm curious from your point of view how what's gone on in our world the last 2 coming up on 3 years now with the pandemic, are you seeing a shift or an increase or anything that comes to mind as far as the challenges that moms are facing pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic? Like, what trends are you seeing? Are there still certain things lingering from the pandemic? Like, what's going on out there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more mom burnout and parental burnout in general that's happening because of that. Moms, we already had such little space that's just for us, for self care, for taking care of ourselves, all of those things. And those spaces were kind of encroached upon. If we think about a stay at home mom whose partner might now be working from home, if not full time, more often, or the kids were home at home more, or just all the pieces where my little tiny bubble that was there is encroached upon, and all of the other demands. We just kept adding more things to my plate. So I'm just now drowning in even more responsibility. And if I haven't had space to even breathe, much less process the impact of all of the last few years and what that's done for me as a human being, first, and second, as a mom, then I'm just sinking under the weight and the pressure of this.
I I know that we're not by any means, we're recording this August 2022. We're not, at a point in life where we can say the pandemic is past tense. However, I'm functional, I'm out in the world, my kids are at daycare, and I don't feel recovered. I still almost have moments of I don't know. I don't want to. I don't know how to describe it. I don't really want to put the full weight of this term on it, but it's almost like PTSD. There are times where when we are stuck inside for snow or they're sick and they can't go to daycare and we're like days and days on end together alone in the house. It's like my brain has the ability to go right back to heavy quarantine. I've come a long way. There's even 6, 8 months ago, I would have said my brain does go right back. Now it has the
Mhm.
ability, it doesn't always, but I feel like we've, in a lot of ways, opened the world back up, so to speak. But I think there
Mhm.
are still a lot of us out there that are not recovered. Like we're just, there are days where I feel like I'm doggy paddling still.
Yes. Yeah. We can still be very much in survival mode sometimes. And even though
Yeah.
it looks different, and as you said, your headspace may be that we're not in the same place that we were before, but our body remembers trauma.
Mhm.
And so, if that for us was a traumatic like experience, right? And that is also subjective, it's our perception of the experience. Our body remembers that. So, that's interesting that you asked that question because I feel like I've seen that this summer has been really tough on a lot of moms
Yes.
because I want there's some similarity, right? Of our body remembers that experience of like the kids are home all the time, on top of the burnout that I've already had. So this summer being different than summer 2019 and before that, because my body is still like triggered by that.
Yeah, and it's like I'm not so much. My kids are little, they're 2 and 4, but when I'm just consuming motherhood content and things on social media, it's like we're coming off of school years that were not typical. So
Mhm.
the summer break, quote unquote, is not what it was because the school year is more stressful and it's, who's home, who's in school, are we wearing masks or not? It's like, it's not as welcomed of a break in the sense because I don't know, it's just all like there's no part of it that feels like what we're used to. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. How do you personally take care of yourself? What does your self-care look like?
My self-care is doing less, has really been my
I
mantra
love that. Yeah.
for the last year or so. My self-care is doing less, which for me means setting boundaries. Setting boundaries, saying no to the things that don't serve me in a positive way, or the things that I don't have capacity for. This may be letting go of the kids after school activities or the things I feel like I should be doing, or committing to things that I don't have the space for. It means doing less things that just aren't serving me, more rest and sleep. I fight my like revenge bedtime procrastination, that
Same.
term that's used to, yeah,
Oh my
like
God. Same.
TikTok scrolling at night, like just my rebelling of wanting to stay up way past when I should to just enjoy some quiet time with my spouse. So all of that, yeah, I'm very guilty of. So just being able to say no to those things that don't serve me and really working on how can I do less. A lot of that is just communicating with my husband too about what are the mental load of motherhood that I'm carrying, coming up with a plan so I can do less of that. The mental load for me is like there's 50 internet tabs open in my mind at once and they're all important. So how can I just like have him take one completely, just take one thing so I can do less? That is my self-care.
Hmm. With him being the stay-at-home dad, are there things that would typically be seen as like the quote unquote mom's role to do that he naturally took on? Or like I can just imagine the types of comments and questions that you've gotten around sharing this. Like I don't, did he just like pick it up, or like how did that work? Like he just like get it what he needed to do? Like I don't know.
Yes and no. I think it's been just like all parenting, right? But there's kind of like we have to find our rhythm and a routine.
Mm,
I think when it comes to the care tasks of the house and the kids,
mhm.
he goes to that 100%. But
Okay.
I have continued to carry the mental load of the
Right.
doctor's appointment,
School
of scheduling
projects, like
things,
all that. Yeah.
school projects, planning the birthdays, like all of that. I carry that mental load. So there we've had to kind of come to a way of supporting each other where I have to be more attuned to his needs of just overstimulation and being kind of, the day-to-day things, or helping out with the care tasks at home more often. And he then helps me with the mental load. So
Yeah.
we each take responsibility. I don't think that we don't strive for equality because that's often unattainable for
Mhm,
most families, but it's equity in that we each feel like we are contributing in a healthy way.
mhm. And I have a little bit of clarity on my question, and you don't need to re-answer it. I just want to state it for the purpose of what I was asking for. It's like, as women, we have role models for what it looks like to be a stay-at-home parent, or to be, what's considered the typical mom stuff, right? Like we've watched our mothers do it, we've watched our grandmothers do it, we've seen every mother on a television show do it for years. Men don't have as many, fathers don't have as many role models of what it looks like to be the dad at home. So, it's almost like it comes second nature for us to be like, oh, I'm home with the kids. Why don't I throw in a load of laundry? Why don't I clean this? And I can imagine, love him dearly, my husband, when he's home with my kids all day on a Saturday, he's not thinking of those things. He's not going, oh, why don't I throw in this laundry? And that's okay. He does other things, but it's what we've seen. It's what's been modeled for us. And so to reflect that, it's interesting. I don't know. I dig it.
Oh
It's
yeah.
interesting.
And because we have no model, it has its pros and cons, right? As we get to completely lay the foundation of what we want our
Oh.
parenting and home life to look like. So it
Mhm.
gives us freedom in a new way. But there's also the challenge of there's no model for this, that this is lonely, that this is a new experience, that there is, you know, shame coming at me for not being more present as the mom, and a lot of shaming of my husband for not quote providing for his family like
Right, like, how
society
could he
thinks
let
are
you do
considered.
that, right? Like,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
and
Yes.
he doesn't have as many peers to go to and say, you know, "Oh my god, did you get a load of what the kids did today?" Like, anyway.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah. So we had to kind of create our, motherhood doesn't come with a village, even though we're given that message. So we've
Right.
had to create our village, create a routine and system that works for us. And a lot of years of trial and error, but we've made it. We made it
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. And I totally experienced the revenge bedtime situation, procrastination too. I do scroll TikTok, and one thing I wanted to say to you and ask you about, I've opened up a conversation on my show and on my platforms about mental health for content creators, and
Mm.
you are working it. Like, you are hustling, you are out there. Your videos are constantly appearing on my TikTok, on my Instagram. Like, as now a small business owner, like, this is just part of the gig. And I'm curious how you feel about it. Is it, this is inspiring to me and I love it, or I'm doing this for the sake of my business and for the sake of helping people? Like, how do you mentally manage that you have to create content, or that you want to create content? I don't know. I'm trying not to put words in
Yeah.
your mouth, but anyway, go ahead.
And I think it's both. So many experiences in our life can be a both and. I can both really enjoy this and it can also be tough. So for me, it's how do I do less? How do I do this, but also do less in that juxtaposition of setting my own boundaries with that? Then maybe I'll batch record content, set down in a when I'm in a time and place to do that. And then being able to feel like I'm more in control of it and something that I get to do. I enjoy being able to do therapy and coaching and help moms and just seeing comments from people where they just connect with it in a way that they've never heard somebody talk about something before, right? Or they just need more of this stuff. So that really fuels me in building community and being able to help people where therapy may not be accessible for them, or where there's all of these barriers that have prevented them, like me at one point, from accessing therapy. But if they can just connect with somebody, I love it. And then having my own, I love TikTok. I found that it's a new love for me, and just making those videos in that way that for me takes more is more fulfilling and takes less work than like Instagram or other social media things. So I try to see what is serving me in the way that I need right now in this moment and connect with that, and just having some self-compassion and being kind to myself if you know what, I'm just not feeling it today or this week, and just practicing being kind to myself with that and not adding in all of these expectations just because I feel like I like quote should be doing something.
hmm and I have to say, as an outsider looking in, it doesn't look like you have days where you're not feeling it. Like, the content is constantly flowing, and I think that is, I think it's important to share both sides, because I do, I think, and perhaps you can relate. It's like, as a person who creates content, when you feel that way about someone, when I watch your stuff and I see that it's constantly coming out, immediately compare. And I'm like,
Mm.
oh, I didn't jump on that trend, or I'm not doing enough, or I wonder what kind of social media planner she uses. And I'm not saying only you. I don't mean this to be
Right.
like an attack on you. It's just the idea of comparison. And just, that's one thing I'm really struggling with right now, is just not feeling it, like, not feeling the creative, juices in that way. And it's been that way for a little while. And I go through waves of, this is okay, I'm not feeling it. And then I have another wave where I'm like, if you would just put time into this, you'd reach more people, you'd have more listeners, you'd, help more people. And, it's a constant up and down for me. And unfortunately, being a consumer of the content means that it's constantly in my face. you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. So sometimes, just checking in with myself, is it helpful for me to step away from that? If that narrative is not serving me, and the word should is very powerful in shaming and introducing shame for us. And I feel like I should be doing something, or we get into this comparison of, do I need to step away and let me just kind of realign with what are the things that I'm doing a really good job at. And yes, we can get stuck in that of like, I don't have as many followers, right? Or like people aren't engaging, or I'm just not feeling it. But it's
Mhm.
looking at kind of recentering myself to look at what are all of the places where I can fill my cup in other ways. And the more that I do that in other spaces, the more that maybe it can naturally give me the energy to do this instead of
Mhm.
forcing something that just is hard for me right now and letting it be hard. And that's okay.
Mhm. Mhm. All right. Well, Anya, is there anything related to the work you do, or anything we've talked about in this conversation that you want to add to, something that I didn't think to ask you, something that you want to leave people with? Anything coming to mind?
Yeah, I think, we talked about it a little bit, but clarifying the difference between postpartum depression and the baby blues, I think is important as we have
Okay.
that conversation from pregnancy and postpartum moms. The baby blues is often, we talk about it a lot and what to expect. And this is something that is normal, but it peaks 3 to 5 days postpartum and it doesn't last longer than 2 weeks. So it's normal as a new mom to have fluctuating emotions, the hormones, some sadness, some rage, but that the baseline mood is happiness and joy and motherhood with some rage kind of sprinkled in or some sadness sprinkled in. And it doesn't last longer than 2 weeks. When we go into postpartum depression, it's more chronic, lasting longer than 2 weeks, and just not feeling like myself. And I want moms to know, the difference in that is if it continues, it's probably something more than just the baby blues. And whether it's the baby blues, anxiety during pregnancy, postpartum depression, or just the number one thing I hear is I just don't feel like myself. I just don't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. That is a good enough reason to seek help for you. And it will continue to have this positive ripple effect on you, first and foremost, because you matter and your needs are important. But it also positively serves your relationship if you have one, your kids, your community, the work that you do. You're worth the investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Boom. Yeah, you're right. And you know what? It's a whole other tangent, but as you're talking, I'm also thinking about how we did not touch on, I think there's a big, physical aspect of it too. Like the not feeling like yourself also stems from really just not looking like yourself and not physically feeling like yourself. Like that's a real a real thing. And it's hard. It's heavy. It hits you like a Mack truck. It's like, whose body is this?
Yeah, physically, mentally, and emotionally. We may not look and feel like ourselves.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to link, of course, your website and all of your socials in the show notes. And Anya, I appreciate you so much and the work you're doing. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. What I absolutely cannot get out of my mind following this conversation is that even within the mental health field, the needs of mothers are not considered as much as they should be. I mean, look at Anya's experience. She's a therapist, she was a new mom, and she didn't even fully recognize or understand what she was experiencing postpartum. It's mind boggling. And I want to make sure that I'm very clear, that we're all very clear on the distinction in that it's not because she's not a good therapist. It's not because she's not qualified. It's that therapists aren't necessarily trained on postpartum depression, anxiety, all the things that come in postpartum at any great length. Also, of course, I have to imagine that it's much harder assessing one's own experience than it is someone else's. But overall, it just really feels like something has to be done here. Maternal mental health, I mean, maybe this is too much, but it should be a major. It should be a major in college. Okay, you want to be a therapist? Well, maybe not a major. All right, you major in psychology and your minor is maternal mental health. Is that a thing anywhere? If you know of that being a thing, let's find it. Let's hit copy and paste and recreate it across the board. I mean, at the very least, we need, as part of every curriculum, some required courses on maternal mental health. What do you think? I mean, it seems obvious to me, of course it would seem obvious to me, but I don't know. We got to do something. Anya, I just so appreciate you sharing your story and your experience. I know that I really thought it was insightful to hear all the things that you and your husband and your family have done to really make adjustments and accommodations. And I mean those words in the best way possible for your motherhood experience, because that's what should happen. That's what should be done, right? Is whatever the outcome looks like for Anya, it was that she went back to work and her husband stayed home. Whatever version of the family life, the home life feels good to you and your partner or you and your support system. And I so appreciated the in-depth explanation of postpartum depression versus clinical. I really learned a lot there. And I've often wondered, is the depression that I experience postpartum or clinical, or I don't know. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's what I experience. But I think that they are very important to talk about. The distinctions are very important to talk about. Mom rage versus anxiety. I loved even just the example of talking about the kid running into the street and how it can come across as rage, but really it's fear. Like, it was so spot on. I really resonated with all of that. So thank you. Thank you again for being here with me. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.